If you had asked me if I thought theater or writing would be my job when I was first stepping onto St. Mary's campus, I would have said with certainty that my job would require using my English degree, while my theater degree would be more of a hobby than an actual job. Lord, how time has a sense of humor. My last story ended with winning the dedication award at my school's performing arts gala and heading to college to give 'em hell. College was a whole new experience, and it was a little overwhelming at first, but I've always been a social butterfly, so I wasn't drowning. And the fact that I was only required to take 2 STEM classes and could spend the rest of my time doing classes for literature, creative writing, or acting made it even better. First semester of freshman year found me in my very first acting class. There were some students that were clearly there to tick this off as an arts course, but there were students like me that had been acting for years. And one person in my class just instantly pegged me as their rival. We'll call them Blaine. It also didn't help that we were instantly put up for the same part in the fall play. The show was Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, and both of us had been called back to play Festy the Fool, but I made the mistake of saying I wanted a lead after years of being in the ensemble, and I think the director took that for me saying, "It's Viola or nothing," which I admit I could have phrased differently. You'd think that Blaine would back off after getting the part, but nope. If anything, they became even more passive-aggressive to me. And it wasn't just me being paranoid or dramatic. One of the girls in my theater class outright told me that Blaine had smack-talked me because we both got called back for the same part. Another friend of mine told me that they heard Blaine calling me a bitch for no reason. Whether or not this is actually true remains to be seen, but I do know that Blaine was especially passive-aggressive to me whenever we did interact. They'd always roll their eyes whenever I spoke, and if they ever acknowledged me in the first place, and on the rare chance they actually spoke to me, it was always sharp and snippy. I also signed up at the end of the year to sing for the Theater, Film, and Media Studies Night, which was similar to the Performing Arts Gala at my high school, and while I was singing, Blaine was on their phone the entire time. Since we were both TFMS majors, we were unfortunately in a lot of the same classes and in a lot of shows together. I auditioned for both 12th Night and Spring Awakening, but I wasn't cast in either, despite getting callbacks for both. Frankly, I was devastated. Theater life requires you to develop thick skin when it comes to rejection, but despite getting better at handling it, it never gets easier. It didn't help that the person who made me feel so worthless was cast in both. Though considering the mature content of Spring Awakening, maybe it was for the best that I wasn't cast. I don't think I'd have wanted my parents to watch me being sexually assaulted on stage after years of attending Catholic school plays. The final play that year was a community-written performance directed by the woman who was our intro to acting professor. This woman was freaking amazing, and I loved her so much. I actually participated in a few of the interviews that went into writing the script, and one of my recordings was even used in one of the scenes. I talked about my pop-up, who was a chemist for the Manhattan Project, so a lot of people thought he was a bad person for helping develop the A-bomb. But my pop-up was one of the sweetest men I've ever known, and he actually signed a petition to prevent the government from using these weapons on civilians. But that's not important. Blaine was in this show as well, and this is where things get a bit awkward in so many ways. This was a community-written show that tackled racism and prejudice on campus. Despite my college being a very liberal school, we were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by conservative homes. One of the lines in the show had a student of color talking about how their mother was worried about them going to school in, quote, Confederate flag land, and frankly, that's not too far off the mark. Despite the fact that the play was about racism and prejudice, the cast decided to separate itself into white actors and actors of color. There were 2 exceptions to this rule. One of the ensemble members was Latino, who only hung out with the white actors, and me, who only hung out with the black actors, because they actually treated me like I mattered. Since Blaine had already been in 2 shows despite only being a freshman, they instantly became the darling for the more mainstream theater crowd. They were still passive-aggressive to me and sometimes even outright rude. In one scene, the 4 main characters are at the health clinic on campus and watching TV to distract themselves from everything going on, only for the shows they watched to reflect all of their anxieties. At one point, they watched Family Feud, and Blaine was playing the show host. They were supposed to ask me a question, and I was supposed to give a racist answer. But in one dress rehearsal, they didn't say the line, and they just looked at me with an annoyed expression and said, "Say your freaking line!" For the longest time, I thought I was being dramatic or sensitive, but about a week before opening night, all the actors of color invited me to go to Chipotle with them. And they all talked about how a lot of the white actors were really fake to them, too. They said they all noticed Blaine being rude to me, and that they agreed that it was ridiculous. But I managed to get through freshman year. Despite the fact that I talked about them so much, Blaine was really just a small part of my college experience, and they were hardly enough to completely ruin it for me. I loved my school, and I made so many fantastic friends and had so many wonderful experiences. I plan to make a whole video about all the shenanigans I got up to during my college years, but that's a story for another day. One thing I will say is that in my intro to acting class, there was a guy from an Italian family, and every time someone did a scene, or anything really, he'd yell, "Give him a Tony!" And that became the unofficial motto for our class. Sophomore year, the show was Happy Birthday Wanda June, a play written by Kurt Vonnegut. Or, as the actor who played the main character put it, Happy Birthday Wanda June. Who the hell is Wanda June? I played Mildred, the deceased alcoholic ex-wife of the main character, and I freaking loved playing her because pretending to be schnockered is a ton of fun. And I even had a little flirty relationship with Colonel Masimov, the Beast of Yugoslavia. The director, The head of the Film and Media Studies department was also a really fun guy as well. Someone gave me the advice to try and make him laugh during the audition, and I went back to my Beauty and the Beast misadventure with my shoe and decided to do it purposefully this time. I auditioned with a monologue of a girl being annoyed for whatever reason, so I did a shuffle kick on the floor, only for my shoe to go flying. The director thought it was hilarious, and I think that's what got me the role, though I had to be careful when it came to pretending to be drunk. The director instructed me to spill a bit of the martini, aka water and an olive in a martini glass, because Mildred was a sloppy drunk, but poor Wanda and Colonel Masimov had to keep telling me not to spill too much because I was accidentally splashing them as well. At the end of sophomore year, they announced the fall performance would be The Scottish Tragedy, and I was so excited. I'd taken quite a few Shakespeare classes in high school and had even read The Scottish Tragedy for a school project in 8th grade, so I knew the play inside and out. Even better, the show was going to be done in period garb, and I freaking love historical costumes. I love costumes in general, but period garb especially is just so fun. I got even more excited when I learned that it was going to be a half play, half walking tour. The school I went to was the first capital of my state when it was founded back in the 1600s, so there's a historical site right next to campus. It was hardly larger than an acre, but there were houses and old stores and the old state house, which was where the majority of the performance took place. As I mentioned in my rainbow hoodie dress video, I wanted more than anything to be one of the witches. When I got the email, I was so thrilled that I had to put a pillow over my mouth to muffle the screams and keep Z from getting in trouble with their RA. The Scottish Tragedy was so much fun. I had a blast running around in my corset and petticoats and pretending to do spells around the bonfire. It was like a full-on LARP rather than a simple performance, especially because the audience walked around the historical site with us. And it was a really clever performance too in a bunch of subtle ways. The director was the same woman who directed the community show my freshman year, so she wasn't afraid to get political with her work. The show was meant to be commentary as well as performance, and I definitely think it did what it set out to do. For one thing, she had all of us do research on the witch trials, both in Scotland, England, and America, because most of the women accused were women who had been ostracized for one reason or another, and she made sure that kind of work went into the performance. Lady Macbeth, Lady Macduff, and the witches were all working together to take down Duncan, and have Lady Macbeth rule as queen. The witches themselves were actually servants in the Macbeth household. There were only 3 witches that spoke, but there were other ensemble members that were the witches in the coven and the servants at the house. And there was a really funny moment that the director put in the show. When King Duncan comes to stay at the Macbeth estate, aka the State House, I was the one to answer the door. When I saw it was the king, I backed away to the side and curtsied. Duncan then proceeded to hang his jacket over my head like a coat rack. One time he did this and the director just started laughing and said, "He's such an asshole." There were a few people in the cast and crew that didn't like me, but I've been negative enough in this section, so I'm only going to talk about the good stuff. I was cast as Witch Number 2. Witch Number 1 was someone I'd actually gone to middle school with, and we're still friends to this day. Witch Number 3 had been in the community-based show with me, and she was really cool. She didn't take shit from anyone, but she was also really sweet. One time I got locked out of my dorm, and the RA on duty wasn't picking up her phone, so Witch Number 3 let me stay in her room with her until campus security showed up to let me back in. Ironically enough, just as it had been in Honk, we made a reference without even meaning to because of the backstories we all came up with. My backstory that I came up with for Natalia Moss, the name I gave my character, was that I had been in a relationship with another woman who had gotten caught and hanged. So I went to Lady Macbeth because I wanted revenge on the men that had killed my lover. Witch Number 1 had a daughter out of wedlock and had thus been ostracized from the town as a loose woman. Even more, their daughter had been born with red hair, which back in the day was seen as a bad omen. I don't remember the backstory Witch Number 3 came up with, but I remember her being the secondary matron of the coven, when Lady Macbeth wasn't around. And she took over as the head of the coven when Lady Macduff was killed and Lady Macbeth went insane. Another fun fact, Lady Macbeth and Lady Macduff actually coordinated their stories as well, saying that they were actually lovers and Lady Macbeth went insane because of grief from losing her lover rather than guilt over killing Duncan, which I think makes a little bit more sense. Witch Number 3 was also the tallest out of the whole coven and spoke with the most even voice and mature body language. In other words, we'd accidentally made the triple goddess archetype. I was the maiden, youthful, passionate, and energetic. Witch Number 2 was the mother, loving, protective, and nurturing. And Witch Number 3 was the crone, wise, intuitive, and guiding. I didn't even realize this until last year, and I was grinning like a little gremlin when I did. Now, here's a huge joke that the cast and I all had, and I still giggle about to this day. You might be wondering why I'm calling it The Scottish Tragedy instead of Macbeth. Ugh. It's because saying the actual title is really bad luck. Granted, it's just supposed to be bad luck in a theater and not everywhere, but I take no chances. And I'm not just saying that, I've seen it in action. When I was in Guys and Dolls in high school, someone said it just outside the theater on the day of the last performance. Sure enough, right before she had to sing Sit Down, You're Rockin' the Boat, Nicely Nicely Johnson broke her foot and had to do the rest of the performance with one shoe. not even mentioning that she couldn't do the dance for Sit Down, You're Rocking the Boat, which included her stepping up onto and jumping down from a desk. I made the mistake of saying it in the theater before one of the performances of Little Shop of Horrors. We were studying it in our English class, but superstition doesn't care about semantics. Not only did one of the teeth for one of the puppets for Audrey 2 decided to fall out right before the performance, but the dentist drill decided to break and fall off the table during the scene. Seymour did a great job recovering, though. He was supposed to say, "But it's rusty," when Orrin says he's going to use the drill on him, but it fell apart right before he was supposed to say it was rusty. So after the drill fell over, he just said, "But it's broken." This is why we go to improv club, kids. Now, the curse is usually a bit warped for when the tragedy is actually being performed. There's usually not any major incident, more so it's just a sense of unnerving things happening. For example, the older version of the theater kid where I work did the Scottish tragedy a few years ago, and their theater was under a grocery store. One night, the butcher section of the store flooded, so the walls looked like they were crying blood all through production. Of course, as was said in another famous Shakespeare play, all the world's a stage, and our stage just so happened to be outside. And our performance was in the fall of 2019. And we all know what happened in the winter of 2019. In other words, we caused COVID. Sorry about that. But the show must go on. Even though the rest of the year was remote, and most of the next year was as well, we continued on, doing our classes and our performances on Zoom. I even did a few Zoom plays for the community theater in my city. Those are all linked down below. Fall of my senior year, we did She Kills Monsters Virtual Realms. The director was the same guy who directed Happy Birthday Wanda June, so he knew me, and he knew what I was capable of. I actually asked if I could write my own audition monologue, which I still have. Philosophical Pizza Box. Buddy, look, I know it's late and I know you're hungry, you just want your pizza, but I can't give it to you until you pay for it. That's how this works. We're living in a capitalist society where underpaid workers like myself are told time and again that we charge too high for a fucking pepperoni. It's not like it even matters anyway, why even listen to me? I'm just an overworked corporate slave to Papa John, what's my opinion worth? You know what? Fuck it. Take the pizza. Don't even bother paying. And while you're enjoying that slice of pepperoni, don't even think about how I worked the graveyard shift for 8 hours only to go to class the next morning sleep deprived and my ears still ringing from angry customers shouting at me. It's not like I need the money for paying rent, my tuition, my food. Hey, it may just be life itself to me, but it's just $15 for you. I mean, it doesn't even matter eventually. That pizza will be gone, digested and shit out, and you'll have forgotten about it in a week. And I'll end up graduated from my school with a degree that isn't even useful for anything, working a miserable job that I absolutely despise because this world revolves around money, and who has the money, and who makes the money, and who doesn't have the money, and eventually I'll die. Yeah, that's what I thought. That'll be $15.99. That was Philosophical Pizza Box, the monologue that I wrote for She Kills Monsters. He thought it was hilarious and said that I had real acting chops. I was cast as Calliope, the elven sex pot, except the scene where I flirt with the main character and say that everyone flirts with me was cut by accident. At least I hope it was by accident, because the director really liked that scene and he wasn't happy when it was cut, so if that was done on purpose, God help the poor son of a bitch that pissed him off. Either way, it was a lot of fun. It was a bit weird doing a performance with people who weren't even in the same room as me, but I loved it. And I was then and still am a massive D&D nerd, so it was great to have two of my loves in one place. And it was even funnier when the actors who knew about D&D had to correct things that the script got wrong. The next semester was my last. Just as it had been during my freshman year, the teacher for my intro to acting class, though by this point I'd had her for at least 6 other classes, was doing another community-based production, and I signed up to help write the play, in addition to being a part of it. I think it's rather fitting that my first and last play in college were both community-based plays, and a lot of the interviews I did ended up in the script, including the interview that I did with Z. And something in their answers moved the director so much that a line they said became the major line from the show. We all said it at the end, some of us in different languages. I did sign language. The script was a bunch of people in the waiting room at a hospital, and once again it showed biases, though more in medical situations than just on our campus. It wasn't the bang I thought I'd go out on, but I'd helped write the play. I was with it from the first thought to the final curtain call, and I was proud. But that wasn't my only writing credit my final year. All seniors were required to complete a special project which would be presented at the end of the year. I decided that my project would be a story and then a play focusing on the themes of self-doubt, identity, purpose, and mental health, all things that I had been struggling with for years and still do struggle with to this day. That play was The Face in the Mirror, which is still up on my channel, link in the description. It was very long, difficult, frustrating work. My advisor, who was freaking amazing, was also very strict. She grilled me about every word choice and asked me to defend every plot decision until it was perfect. When she told me that she was proud, I believed her. And I was damn proud too. This was my first, and currently only, time being in the director's chair, and let me tell you, I much prefer being an actor. Mad props to anyone who has, is, or plans to be a theater director, but that's not for me. Too stressful, too many moving parts, too many things to consider, too many things that could potentially go wrong. The actor that played Doubtfire was initially just supposed to be the voice of the ex-boyfriend, but the original Doubtfire had a major medical emergency the week before we started filming, and I was left scrambling. But everyone involved was a great sport, and I was super happy to be working with such talented people. I still miss the friends I made at St. Mary's, but when I walked across that stage at graduation, officially a BA-trained actor, I was damn proud. After that summer, I kicked it into high gear in terms of getting a big boy job. I spent 5 months working as an editor for a law firm, and I'm not exaggerating when I said that job tanked my mental health so badly that it almost killed me. That's a story for another day. Either way, when that job eventually ended, I was a mess. It took me another 4 months of therapy and support from Z and my friends before I was able to get back to being anywhere close to my old self. I hadn't even been able to work the summer camp I'd worked at since I was 15 because I was that wrecked. I got back on my feet just in time to sign up for a different summer camp, so I was able to get some income at least. Near the end of the summer, I found a notice for auditions for a community theater production of The Sound of Music. Oh, the irony. My first audition before starting school and my first audition after finishing school. I wanted more than anything to shine again. I thought that's what I was missing. Unfortunately, I think one of the children at the camp I was working for that summer got me sick because the day before the audition I tested positive for COVID. To say that I was devastated was an understatement. A lot of people said that they wouldn't blame me for throwing in the towel, but I'd let too much of myself slip away that year. I wasn't going to give up that easily. And the director was kind enough to let me audition virtually, and lo and behold, I got a callback. Granted, it was for one of the nuns and not for Maria or Liesl or Mother Superior like I'd hoped, but the fact that I was called back for a named character with a solo was better than nothing, and I was thrilled when I was cast as Sister Sophia. The cast was made up of absolutely wonderful people. Sister Margareta quickly cemented herself as the cast mom, and she and I spent a lot of time goofing around with Sister Bertha. Uncle Max was just as hilarious on stage as he was off, and Maria was an absolute sweetheart, and they were all such kind people too. One time at a Saturday rehearsal, I was struck by a sudden low and couldn't get thoughts of worthlessness and failure and unimportance out of my head. When Captain Von Trapp found me crying outside the rehearsal building, he sat with me and asked if I was okay. And the children were all so sweet. Martin and Brigitte were especially fond of me. When they found out that I was someone who liked stories and telling stories, they were at my side as often as they could be. I remember knitting something from a book I'd gotten for Christmas when I was still in college. There was a story attached to every pattern, usually about a young woman knitting something magical to save her from a terrible fate. Marta and Brigitte loved these stories, and Marta, despite the fact that she was only about 8 or 9, was a huge Phantom of the Opera fan and wanted me to tell her the story over and over again, as well as sing her the songs for the show. That cast brought me back to life. Being part of The Sound of Music with such wonderful people taught me that I didn't need to shine. I needed to be found. And they found me when I couldn't find myself. I didn't just feel like I was part of a cast. I was part of something real. Now, the people who were part of the show itself were wonderful. The people who ran the community theater weren't. The show they did after that was something rotten, and this is where it gets kind of annoying. I auditioned and received a callback email for both female leads. The format of the email is important to the story, and it was formatted like this. Callback for the parts of Nick and Nigel Bottom and Shakespeare at 2 p.m. These are the people we need for that. Callbacks for Portia and B, the parts that I had been called back for, 2:30 p.m. These are the people we need for that. My name was on that list. Callbacks for the minstrel, Brother Jeremiah, and other secondary male parts, 3 p.m. These are the people we need for that. Callbacks for dance, 3:30 p.m. These are the people we need for that. I was only told to come to the callback for Portia and B. I sang what they wanted me to, read what they wanted me to, and went back out to the theater lobby, where I waited, and waited, and waited. All the other women that had been called back for Portia or Beatrice had been told that they could leave, but I was still waiting an hour after the other women had left. At this point, I was getting anxious. I was tired, I hadn't eaten lunch, so I was hungry, and I was only getting more anxious with every passing second. Finally, I grabbed the assistant director and asked her what they still wanted me for. She then informed me that the directors wanted me to dance. I hadn't been told that I'd be dancing ahead of time. I had nothing prepared. I didn't even have tap shoes, and they'd specifically told us that it was a callback for a tap number. And this was on top of the fact that I was anxious, tired, and hungry. So to say that I was freaking out was an understatement. I did not have the stamina to dance, and if I tried, I would have made a fool of myself. So I asked the assistant director point blank, if I leave now, will that prevent me from being cast? She went inside to talk to the directors. She was in there for 5 minutes before she came back out and told me that not dancing wouldn't negatively impact what the directors thought of me. That was all I needed. I got the hell out, went home, and took a nap. About a week later, the cast list came out, and I wasn't cast at all. I was disappointed, but I also knew that rejection was part of being in theater, and I didn't take it too personally. The woman who played Maria was also called back for both female leads, and she wasn't cast either, even though she was talented as hell. So I did my best not to be too heartbroken, but I still wanted to know what I could do to improve for future auditions. When I emailed them asking how I could have done better, this was how they responded. Quote, Maeve, good afternoon, and thank you for the follow-up. Something Rotten is a show in which most of the characters dance, so the lack of tapping at callbacks was part of the decision. We do understand that there was a lapse of communication as to those expectations in the lobby, and we understand that you stated your frustrations to that effect. Ultimately, while the team was very impressed with your vocals in particular, with the high turnout and strong talent pool, the team went in a different direction. The only reason I wasn't cast was because I didn't dance. In other words, I wasn't cast because they didn't communicate properly. So to say that I was pretty pissed was an understatement. I stewed for a whole few months, but they were my only choice for theater, so I signed up to audition for the next show anyway, though my hopes were very low. That was when I found the advertisement that would change my life, an audition for a murder mystery company. At first, I thought it was a scam. After all, I found it on Instagram of all places. What kind of job advertises on Instagram? But I figured I had nothing to lose, so I signed up for an audition anyway. The entire drive there, I had doubts, and almost turned right back around when the first address we were given led to a really sketchy place on the edge of Baltimore. There was a sign that said the audition had been moved to a different place in the heart of the city, and I almost went right back home. I didn't know what moved me to see it through, but I'm so glad I did. It wasn't like any audition I'd had before. There was nothing prepared for us to read. They just told us to improvise a scene. They brought us back 4 at a time, and we did 2 scenes with one of the other people there with us. The prompts they gave me and my scene partners were for me as a bridezilla and my scene partner as my wedding planner for one, and the other had my scene partner as the head of a mafia family and me as his mother shaming him for not dating the girl he picked out. And I was really damn excited when I got the email for the callback. Unlike the first round, we were greeted not by the actor that ran the audition last time, but rather a character played by that actor. She immediately began improving at us, so we were all tossed in head first. It was so cool seeing people as they made up their characters on the spot, and it was really fun to have my character interacting with theirs. A bunch of strangers connected by a prompt suddenly talking like they were best friends. The community theater audition was supposed to be the week after callbacks for the murder mystery company, but as soon as I had gotten the email that I'd been hired, I emailed the community theater that I would not be auditioning for them, and I haven't looked back. And I'm still working with the murder mystery company to this day. Fun fact, we were actually on Shark Tank last year, so I'm pretty sure we have chapters in more parts of the country now, but I can say for certain that my chapter covers most of the East Coast, so if you want to hire us, I put the link in the description. I don't exaggerate when I say it's my favorite job. Not only am I getting paid to do something that has been an integral part of my identity since I was a toddler, I also get to work with some truly amazing people, both my fellow actors and the people that hire us. There have been some difficult gigs, but the good far, far outweigh the bad. So that's been my theater journey so far, but it's definitely not over. If anything, it's only just begun. Thank you for watching. I have been the Maeve of all trades, and have a lovely day. Oh shoot, will it still be? Are you still going? Yes, you're still going. Okay, where are screenshots? Why didn't I do this ahead of time? Dee 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 doo 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 da 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 da. Good lord, where is it? Are we still recording? Yes, we are. Good.